Thank you. All right, thank you for being here. Before I introduce myself, who is here as a Scrum Master? Please raise your hand. Good. Okay. Who is here who's not a Scrum Master but maybe working in a Scrum team, you know, product owner or dev team member? Okay. Who is here as a manager of a Scrum Master? Okay. And who is here because the name sounds funny and you didn't know where else to go? Okay. Good. Exactly. Thank you very much for that. Who am I? Just a very quick one. I am born and raised in this beautiful city. I lived abroad for quite a while. California, UK, France, and Germany for education reasons or for working reasons. And now for the past 11 years, so since 2012, I've been working in the Agile sphere, and I've been working several different roles. You can find them here, from interim Scrum Master to Agile coach, consultant. I also started 2 social businesses, which is why I call myself a social business entrepreneur. Organization developer, I do workshops, I do trainings, but mostly I work with Scrum Masters, which is why I'm here today and we'll be speaking about this topic of quantifying the performance. So, as I said, I've been in the Agile world for quite a while now, and what I'm really excited about for the past 5 years, I've been an independent coach, and the more often I go into companies, the more often I hear it and see that one statement is actually already a given. That wasn't the case 11 years ago, but nowadays it is a given, which is every Scrum team must have a Scrum Master. There's no real debate about that now anymore. Sometimes people say, okay, well, every 2 teams must have a Scrum Master, but you know, it's pretty much a given, which is what we're really excited about. But whenever I ask, all right, so what's the impact that you're expecting from a Scrum Master, I get this reaction. Sounds familiar? So, and then sometimes I even dare to go one step further and I ask, all right, and if you have that impact, how would you measure it? And that's when people start panicking. Okay? I think historically there's been a bit of abuse, or a lot of abuse, depending on where you've worked, when it comes to metrics or KPIs and these kind of things. And so I think, you know, especially in the Agile world, we're very anti-metrics, which is sometimes fair, but sometimes not. And this is actually why I'm here today and talking about that. So, metrics. I have been asked, I've given this talk before, and I was asked, but okay, it's nice that you're talking about metrics, but what's actually the problem that you're trying to solve here? I think the problem is obvious, but let's make it even more transparent. I think it is a huge problem if we're not measuring the impact of a Scrum Master. Huge problem. Why is that? There are several reasons, and I'll give you 3. Firstly, when you're in the midst of an Agile transformation or when you're starting an Agile transformation, a lot of the time there's a reshuffling of roles, especially when introducing Scrum. You know, we have several roles there, and then there's the question, okay, who will be the product owner? Who will be, I mean, dev team is quite obvious most of the time, but who will be the Scrum Master? And a lot of the time, it's actually, who have we got left? Maybe not the best idea. And it's not, okay, well, Scrum Master, hold on a second, that's this role. What are we expecting from that role? Okay, who has the character traits, skills, whatever, who would best fit that role? That is often not the discussion. And as you probably have noticed yourselves in your companies, a lot of the times it's project managers who get pulled into the role of a Scrum Master. And sometimes that's a really good fit because of character traits, but not always. Just because you're a good project manager does not mean that you're a good Scrum Master, and vice versa. So it would be much more important to look at actually, okay, what are the character traits of that person? What are we expecting from a Scrum Master, and fill the role that way. The second problem that I see if we're not measuring impact is that, again, when I come and work with my clients, sometimes I get hired in the midst of an Agile transition. And mostly because Agile transition is not working the way it should be working. Otherwise, they wouldn't need me. They wouldn't pay money. So when I asked them, okay, well, what's the issue here, and why are you not moving forward? Then we talk about a lot of things, and then I ask, okay, but where are your Scrum Masters? I mean, they're a huge part of the transition, right? I mean, they're the ones trying, pushing this. And then everyone goes like, what? This is the expectation towards the Scrum Master? What? They're supposed to help in the Agile transition? Oh, I wasn't aware of that. Okay. So often, because we're not communicating what we're expecting of a Scrum Master, they're not helping in the Agile transition, or they don't know their role in the big picture. Or the management doesn't know their role in the big picture. And thirdly, and this is a personal one, I see a lot of the times that, especially when working with really good Scrum Masters, that they're getting frustrated over time. Just picture this. You come into work every single day looking at what improvements do we want to make today, what are the impediments, what are the problems. So all day you're just thinking about trying to get better. That means you're never really accepting and being happy with the status quo. So obviously, it's a downward spiral. So if you don't notice how you're moving forward every single day and how things are changing and how they are improving towards the better because of the job that you're doing, you're going to get really frustrated after a while. And I've worked with a lot of really frustrated Scrum Masters. And that's really sad. And so this is kind of why I started with this talk, because I noticed especially fact number 3, and this is my gift. This is at least why I wanted to talk about this topic. But if we want to talk about this topic, obviously we need to talk about what is the accountability of a Scrum Master. Now, if we look at the Scrum Guide, there's a lot of stuff that's in there, obviously, and one message is the Scrum Master is accountable for the Scrum team's effectiveness. Okay, so this is the impact that the Scrum Master is supposed to have. By the way, if you don't know this image, look up YouTube, Ian the Scrum Master, a very funny Scrum Master. Yeah, if you type that in, it's a really funny clip, long time ago, created by Jeff Sutherland. Very hilarious, also about Scrum teams' effectiveness and raising it. So this is what we're focusing on. And we're not talking only about actually stabilizing the effectiveness, but also about raising the effectiveness, right? Because a Scrum Master costs money. So obviously we want to make sure that the Scrum team's effectiveness gets better, gets more effective. So when we're talking about the Scrum Master, that's the accountability. And when I look at a Scrum Master, I look at especially 3 elements. Obviously there's sometimes more, sometimes less, but generally these are the 3 elements. Facilitator, servant leader, and a change agent. These are the 3 elements that should be covered by a Scrum Master, and this is how I've split up the metrics. So for each of these elements, I will give you 5 metrics. So when you walk out of here, you will have 15 metrics to choose from. They are not perfect, they're not ideal. I'm not saying that, I have the magic recipe. What I'm saying is these are ideas, and maybe they will inspire you. Maybe you already have some other ideas and they can complete it, or you can bring some ideas to me and I'll complete this. So, these are just grounds for conversation. So, starting with, again, 15 metrics, so a lot. So bear with me. We'll walk through each of them. Sometimes I'll be a bit faster, sometimes a bit slower, but you'll probably, first of all, I think this is being recorded, not sure, but also you will definitely get the slides and you can take photos, or you can contact me afterwards. So, in terms of the facilitator role, 5 metrics, but with a disclaimer in advance, because most of you are probably German speaking. I see the mistake that a lot of German speakers actually translate facilitator as moderator, which means, facilitate meetings. And that's literally how they see it. But that's not the truth, because most native English speakers will know that facilitation goes way further than that. So for example, if you want to facilitate, or if you facilitate the Scrum process, you facilitate learning, you also facilitate meetings, but also, this is not what we're only doing. So this is really important. Just because you're a facilitator does not mean you're supposed to be in meetings all day, every day, only in meetings. So if we look at the first metric, again, we're supposed to be increasing the team's effectiveness. That's what the accountability is of the Scrum Master. So let's look at Simple, let's look at the meetings. If we want to increase the meeting effectiveness, how do we measure that? We measure that various ways. Probably most of you do that already, have some kind of feedback method at the end of a meeting. I use roti. You can either have it as the Indian bread or actually as return on time invested. So you ask on a scale from 1 to 10. 1 being this meeting, it would have been better if I would have stayed at home and had ironed my shirts. 10 being, this was the most incredible meeting, we were super effective and efficient and I loved it. For example, these 45 minutes, did you get value out of this or not? 1 to 10. And then you can see over time whether this actually improves or not. Or option 2, I'm a big believer that a meeting is most effective if everyone who takes part in it actually also talks and gives some kind of input, because otherwise, why are they there? So I actually keep a tally and look if everyone is actually participating. It's super simple. Like all of these metrics are super, super simple. So keeping a tally and looking at this over time, whether more and more people actually participate. Why are we doing that? Because we want to facilitate our meetings and have a learning impact. By the way, there's always a stamp at one of the corners. Depending on the metric, you will need others for it, and sometimes you can do it yourself. Metric number 2 for facilitating meetings, increasing the meeting efficiency. This is also what we want. How can we do that? Well, we-ish know, or at least we can guess, what is the cost of the average team member, and then we also know if our meetings are getting shorter, right? Because if there's a facilitator, usually they should be getting shorter because we're getting more efficient and more effective. So I can pretty much calculate very quickly what's the amount of money that I'm saving my company by facilitating meetings so well that I can shorten them, or that we're shortening them. Metric number 3, the buzz factor. Who here knows the buzz factor? You're probably all Viennese, because Viennese have dark humor, and I very much enjoy this buzz factor. The buzz factor, it's when, imagine your team ends the day and is done with working, and they go outside and they have to cross the street to get to the bus stop. And they cross the street and they get run over by a bus. How many of your team members have to be run over by a bus for the project, the product, the service to stop? If it's 1, so that one expert who knows everything, if that person gets run over, you have a buzz factor of 1. I wouldn't recommend that. If everyone pretty much knows everything on the project, and you have 5 team members, your buzz factor would be 5. So what you're trying to do continuously, obviously, is to increase that buzz factor so that in the end, there's no risk. It's risk elimination, really. So how do we do that? We can use various things, but I like using the skills matrix. I don't know, most of you probably have worked with skills matrix in the past. I see a bit of nodding. You pretty much just look at what kind of skills do you need in a team for your product, how well do the team members know these skills or have those skills, and then try to increase that over time. Okay, so it's really about facilitating learning. And you can do this, there's so many methods nowadays, pair programming, mob programming, etc. All right, metric number 4. As I said, they're all very easy, very simple. What else do we want? We want the increase in understanding of Scrum. It's also the accountability of a Scrum Master to actually make sure that everyone understands what Scrum is about and why we're using it, etc. And I'm certain that all of you Scrum Masters out there have heard this statement. Why do we need to do a retrospective? Do we really? What's this? Hold on a second. What's the sprint review again? Daily stand-up really every day? Are you sure? So these kind of questions, you don't want to have them all the time, because if you have them all the time, that means that your team members, people in the organization, they have not understood Scrum yet. So a good way of seeing if you're making sure that other people understand what Scrum is about is by actually measuring how often do you get asked. Obviously, it could be that people aren't asking you anymore because they've just given up. Let's hope not. It could just also be because they actually understood what it's all about and you don't need to discuss it anymore. Okay? So that's metric number 4 in terms of facilitation. And metric number 5, last metric in terms of the facilitator element, is actually you want to decrease the context switching. You probably, most of you also know Gerald Weinberg's study on this. It's the graph. He did a study a while back already on how much the switching costs. So how much time, how much money do you lose by maybe taking one more project on, or maybe taking 2 more projects on, or taking more tasks on. So the more you switch, the more time you lose. So on this graph, you can see that if you have one project, one project, let's take it as that, one project, you spend 100% of your time on that project. If you take 2 projects, you spend 40% of them on that one project, 40% on the other, 20% switching time. And the more projects you take on, at some point you're going to be spending most of your time actually in context switching, which means that you're not getting anything done. So what you're trying to do is, of course, you're trying to avoid the switching time. And you can do this in various ways. You can do this, and switching is not only on a project, huge project level, it can also be on a task level. You know, when you're deep in writing code and then suddenly someone's calling you on the phone and you're just like, oh God, this takes so much time again to get back into it. That's already, you know, context switching. So especially if you're in the office, which is not always the case anymore, it's super easy just to keep a tally in terms of, okay, how often does a phone ring? How often is a manager coming in? How often, I don't know, does a colleague call to ask for something completely different? You know, if it's project related, it's one thing, but often it's not. Okay, especially if you have that one expert of the company, that A-star person. Typically, that person gets asked a lot. So it has a lot of interruptions. So you can do this, you know, again, as a tally, or you can do an interruption bucket. You can do this on Miro. All of these things you can also do digitally. You can do it on Miro. You can actually have a bucket which you fill with, doesn't matter, Post-its, gummy bears, anything. And obviously, we want that to decrease. Why do we want that? We want to improve focus, one of the Scrum values. All right. Servant leader, metric 6 to 10. Servant leader, I'm not sure if I have to explain it, I think not, but generally a servant leader, lateral leadership. To me, servant leader, I like that image of a German Shepherd dog. Not to be, you know, like mean or anything, but generally a German Shepherd dog, when you go out into the meadows, into the pastures, and you watch a shepherd work with the dog and the flock of sheep, it's a really nice image. The German Shepherd dog does not, you know, is responsible, is accountable for actually bringing the flock of sheep to a certain point, you know, inside of the stables or to a certain meadow. And the German Shepherd dog doesn't do it like, okay, come on. But he actually does it by circling around the flock of sheep, seeing that everyone knows where they're going, everyone has everything that they need, etc. So that's kind of the image that I have in my head, not meaning that dev teams are sheep and Scrum Masters are shepherd dogs. It's not what I'm saying, but I like the image, okay? So servant leader, making sure that people have everything they need in order to be able to move into a certain direction. So as a servant leader, what do I want? I want to, of course, increase individual and team happiness. Why do I want that? Because we know nowadays that people who are happier at work also perform better. There's enough studies out there, we know this. So how do we measure that? Various ways again. You can, for example, especially if you're inside of the office, you can do a daily happiness index on the door, where you literally just at the end of the day, when you walk out, when you go home, you put for a post-it at the door. You know, how happy have you been today? 2 pluses, 1 plus, 1 minus, 2 minuses. Very, very simple, very effective. Or you can, of course. You can also do it with tallies, or you can pay people to do that. There's these Gallup, for example, or also there's online surveys, for example, the 5 dysfunctions of a team survey. So there's lots of ways. If you look into it, you can find out the happiness of your team and actually track that over time very, very easily. Again, why do we want that? Because we know happy employees are more productive employees by up to 20%. All right, metric number 7. We want to raise team spirit. How do we measure that? By looking at the unplanned overtime index. I am a firm believer that if people are staying overtime, something's wrong. We have sprints. In Scrum, we work in sprints, so this is a given. There's a sprint planning. We give a commitment, or at least we discuss a commitment. We should know what we're going to be delivering and whether that's realistic that we're going to deliver it in that time period. If we're doing overtime, that means that we overcommitted. That means our sprint planning didn't go well. Or it means that maybe only one person is always staying late because, I don't know, for some reason. If only one person is staying late, that means that the team spirit is not really great. So I wouldn't want that either. So, you know, it just shows a lot about the team spirit, really. And you can do that by, I don't know, putting in ping pong balls or golf balls into a vase for every day that you're staying late. Or you can do it again through Post-its or Tally or whatever. So there's lots and lots of ways of tracking this, but just the important thing is to make sure that people are not staying late anymore. So to make sure that they're working together as a team and that the commitment that they've given is actually a real commitment and that they've discussed it, you know. Next metric, we want to improve predictability. Interestingly enough, this is actually one of the things that managers tell me most why they introduced Scrum in the first place, or Kanban, you know, one of the Agile frameworks, is because they want more predictability in terms of delivery. So, of course, we want to make sure that that happens as Scrum Masters. How do we do that? Well, we can look at the commitment at the sprint planning, and then we can look at the delivery at the end. Very simple. This is the image from not a Scrum team, but from a management team that I was working with that committed themselves to several goals over a 1-week period. And then they wanted to have a look whether they're always overcommitting or undercommitting and just wanted to understand their deliveries. And I mean, you can see the trend that they were getting closer to understanding actually how much are they capable of delivering. And this is what we want. We want predictability. Metric number 9. What we also want as a servant leader, because we're keen on self-organization, we want that the team starts being more self-reflective. We want more self-reflection in the team. How do we do that, or how can we track that? How can we measure that? We can look at the number of impediments or the number of improvement ideas that have been brought up by somebody from the team itself. It's not always the Scrum Master who actually has to say, oh, hey, I've got an impediment. Oh, hey, I've got an idea. It should actually come from the team. So, you know, in the end, we want to make ourselves obsolete as Scrum Masters, right? So we can track that, and this is actually, again, from a client. They are a production company, and they had a lot of Kaizen systems in place. And so we could actually track, okay, how many ideas for improvement came up before introducing agility, and then how many ideas of improvement came up after having introduced agility. And we could really, we could see the change. Obviously, one of the improvements could be we don't want any more agility. I don't think that came up, at least I didn't see it. But you can really see, you know, are people being more aware in terms of, okay, we want more improvement in that direction, or removing impediments at least. So we want to foster self-improvement. And the last metric in terms of servant leadership is we want to increase the satisfaction of the main stakeholder of the Scrum Master, which is the Scrum team. How do we do that? We have several options again. We could, how many of you know the concept of merit money? Management 3.0? Anyone want to explain it in a second? No? Okay. Let's just use, you can look it up, Merit Money Management 3.0. It's a concept, it's a reward scheme, it's a reward system where, just imagine it like this, everyone in the team gets fake money, like points, let's say. And then at the end of the sprint or at the end of the quarter or whenever you want to do this, you sit down together as a team and say, well, I've got these points, and I want to give them to you as my team colleague because you did super well, you helped me here, you really made sure that the quality is right, you did this. So I want to make sure that this is like a fake bonus for you, which is why I'm giving you these points. I'm giving to team member number 2, I'm also giving a bit of it. So this is kind of distributing a bonus system in a very self-organized way, gamified. And you could use that to actually look at what's the value added by the Scrum Master. You know, just would you give me, how much money of your budget would you give me for this sprint for the last half year? It doesn't matter, you know, how you're doing it. The main thing is that you're talking about it. And it's not the idea of how much am I worth as a Scrum Master. This is not the question. The question is, what would be of help to you? You know, what would you spend that money on? Why aren't you spending it on the Scrum Master, but on something else instead, or another person instead? So it's again a grounds for conversation. And you can see if that money, that budget that you're getting, those points, increases over time as a Scrum Master, if you're doing this more and more often. Or you can also just say, well, on a scale from 1 to 10, in a sprint review, for example, how supported did you feel by me as your Scrum Master? And see if that actually improves over time. Again, not the number counts, but actually the content behind the question. But, you know, this is important to talk about. Again, why are we doing that? Because we want to foster self-organization and, of course, a culture of feedback. This is important. Last but not least, let's talk about the metrics for me as a Scrum Master as a change agent. I've got 5 more for you. As a change agent, I want to decrease internal costs. Again, as a Scrum Master, I cost money, so I want to make sure that I'm worth my money, and the best way to do that is to make sure that things get cheaper. So how do we do that? We could calculate the cost of a story point. Does anyone do that? There's 1, 2. Okay. Pretty easy. You know, cost of a sprint, and look at how many story points you're delivering and whether that increases over time. You want to make sure that the story points cost less over time. So I like this one. I mean, of course, it's every single one of these metrics, and we'll talk about this in a second. Every single one of these metrics is a bit, you know, I wouldn't use it as a single metric, but I do like this one because I, as a Scrum Master, I do not estimate. So I can't fake my own metric. I can't, you know, influence it. So this is quite nice for that. All right, what do I want to do? I want to increase the productivity of the Scrum team, obviously. Change agent again. What do I want to do? What do I want to achieve? I want to reduce the waste in the organization. How can I measure that? I can look at the amount of waste or the time lost due to these wastes. Has any one of you worked with a waste snake before? In a retrospective? Some of you, yeah. Anyone care to explain it?
Whenever something pops up that is during the sprint considered as waste, you just stick it on the snake.
Exactly, yeah. So you have an image on the wall or on Miro, and anytime anything comes up during the sprint, you write it on a post-it, you put it on there, you put the time that you lost on there, and then at the end of the sprint, in a sprint retrospective, for example, you look at it, you discuss it, and you figure out how to reduce the amounts of waste. This is quite nice because you can do this on an organizational level. Change agent is especially on an organizational level. Why do we want that? We want to increase the productivity and the value flow within the whole organization. Especially important during agile transitions where we change the whole company. What else do we want? We want to have more decision-making power in the Scrum team itself. How do we measure that? Well, we can look at the escalation pyramid. How often do we actually have to escalate an impediment or an idea for improvement because we can't solve that in our team itself? Again, keep a tally. See how that changes over time. Number 14. One more to go. What else do we want? We want to speed up the value flow to the customer, right? Because we want to become more effective as a Scrum team, and being more effective means we actually deliver value faster. How do we do that? We want to decrease lead time, and we want to measure that. So from the second of, I don't know, I as a user have an idea and I tell it to the PO or whoever too, doesn't matter, but it's written down to, hey, it's actually delivered, I'm using it and I'm happy with it. That's a lead time. And we want to make sure that that decreases because we want to bring more value faster to our clients, to our users. So, yeah, focusing on customer satisfaction. And last but not least, we want to increase the customer value. How do we measure that? Well, there are several ways again. Most companies nowadays already do a Net Promoter Score, so we can just have a look at that and see how that changes over time. Or we can also just do an easy feedback round at the end of a sprint review where we've got our customers present or our users present and just ask them, how satisfied are you on a 1 to 10? And again, look at how that changes over time, how it's increasing, hopefully. Why do we do that? Because we want to foster feedback culture and make sure that customer satisfaction comes first. 15 metrics. And I've still got your attention. Good. So, what is my message today? Again, I said these are inspirations. These are ideas that I've heard from various people, that I've worked on with some of my clients, that I've come up with, that I've also come from open space sessions and various conferences. So this is like a list of things that I've heard, and I thought this might be a good idea to sum them up. But what do we do with these now? So I want to ask you to use them for self-reflection if you're a Scrum Master, because that's really what this is all about, right? Use them to figure out, okay, what do you want to achieve? I mean, you're doing Scrum, you're a Scrum Master. Why are you doing Scrum? What are you trying to achieve? This might not be the same thing. Why is your organization doing Scrum? What are they, or what is this organization trying to achieve? And then think about, okay, how do you want your team to be different in X amount of time? What do you want to focus on? How will you notice that? What needs changing? And where can you as a person, because every Scrum Master is different, where can you actually add the most value? How would you define yourself for having been a good Scrum Master? Just use these to really think about it. And then last but not least, just think about if you could measure that, if there's some way to see an improvement, or maybe not an improvement, that gets worse, and then you can figure out how to make it better again. Make sure to use these metrics as grounds for conversation. Use it to clarify the expectations together with the rest of your organization, your management, your team, other stakeholders, maybe even a customer, whoever you're working with. Make sure that you have the same expectation and that you spoke about that. Maybe you can also use it in your coaching, sparring partner role. Sometimes you have a Scrum Master buddy or an Agile coach as a buddy, and you can actually discuss these things, see how things are improving or not, and figure out how to actually use these metrics as a lever to make sure that your team gets more performing every day, because that's what you're in charge of, that's what you're accountable for. You can use it again to ask yourself certain questions, what do you need from your management or from your stakeholders to actually have a higher lever for impact? These are all just questions that you can ask yourself and discuss with others. You can use the metrics for an argument for your next pay rise. And then also, of course, use it to compare your job description with the expectations that were voiced to you, because often job description is actually not what then happens in reality, and you can figure out, okay, how far is your organization really, and do you want to be a part of that? Okay, since we're talking about metrics, and I said in the beginning, metrics are really, a lot of people panic when they hear the word metric. I do want to give you a few do's and don'ts. When you do work with metrics, make sure that they're sustainable ones. Quick wins are nice, but not that interesting in the long run. So make sure to figure out a way of finding sustainable metrics. Make sure to use a variety of them. So I would never use metric 5 only. I would always, play around with them, use a variety of them to see, what works, or not what works, but to see, okay, what's working where and why, and it's part of a system, right? So you need several metrics. Be aware that you're in a complex environment. So it's not going to be, because I do this, then this happens. It's not going to work like that. Okay, so again, figure out why this is happening. It's again, the direction is more important than the actual result. Okay, so you want to see the trend of the metric. You don't want to see whether, your meetings are now all a 10. Yeah, that's great. But the important thing is, did they go up from a 1 to a 5, or were they always a 10, Think about what you want to tell your team. This is what I get a lot of critique for. I would really think about whether you want to tell them. Because of course, if you're going to tell them, by the way, I'm going to now measure how much a story point costs, and then I want to make sure that the costs decrease, and I'm very sure this is going to change something when it comes to estimation. So think about which metrics you want to be explicit about up front to your team, and which things you might want to tell them afterwards as a grounds for conversation. Hey, I've been noticing this and this. This is where I kept track, and I think I'm noticing this. Can we talk about that? Still make it transparent, but maybe not up front. Always measure in relation to the past. I think most Agilists know this. When estimating as well, you measure in relation to something. And continuously change metrics to trick the system. Because again, at some point your Scrum team will find out, or your stakeholders, and tell me what you'll measure, and they'll tell you how I'll behave. So make sure to always change them and thus trick the system, especially, or not especially, but if you're using several ones, that helps. Yeah, that's a quote. Also, when working with metrics, don't use the same metrics too often. Very simple. The team evolves, the system evolves, the organization evolves. It might make sense to change them a lot, or not a lot, but change them regularly. Always, and this is really important, and I think this is why people are scared of metrics, is because we don't care about the number itself. We care about the trend behind it, and we care about the conversation behind it. This is what is the important thing. Okay, so make sure not just to look at the number, but actually have a conversation to understand why is it going in that direction or not. Do not, we're all ethical people here, do not abuse the data that you're collecting. This is one of the reasons I think why I'm getting a lot of critique for don't tell your team. So just don't abuse the data. Don't compare teams or Scrum Masters. This also sometimes happens, which is a bit silly. You shouldn't be doing that. And don't annoy your team. This might also happen. If you're coming with 20 metrics that they're supposed to all fill in or do, they will get really, really annoyed and probably put you in the interruption bucket. So make sure, just gamify it, simplify it, only use a few metrics, change it regularly, and don't involve them only involve them as much as is necessary. So to finish off this talk, I have a call to action for Scrum Masters. Think about, the impact that you want to have. Think about how you want to measure yourself, and then, start measuring. Just look at the trend, and then you take that data and talk to the people that are relevant to you. Okay, and then when you've had the conversation, you've figured out your everything you wanted to know, and then start again with measuring something else, maybe, or measure the same thing again. Whatever is relevant to you in your situation. If you're here and you're not a Scrum Master, I also have a call to action for you. Talk to your Scrum Master. Thank you very much.